Welcome to People in Profit, your essential business briefing. Coming up, is the era of low oil prices over? We look at how consumers in India are adjusting to paying more for fuel. Is hosting the World Cup worth the investment? We investigate as the competition kicks off in Russia. And as the EU mulls tariffs on imported jeans, we meet a French manufacturer with a 125-year history in the business. First up, though, oil prices have been creeping up steadily in recent months to levels not seen in 3 years. The world had gotten used to cheaper fuel, and now these rises are hitting consumers hard. As one of the world's fastest-growing economies, India's consumption of oil has been rising sharply. The price of petrol and diesel has hit record highs recently in major Indian cities. Our correspondents sent this report from New Delhi.
The fuel stations are deserted in New Delhi. Not everyone can afford to refuel their vehicles.
I used to fill up the tank for €8, but now it costs over €10.
Price of fuel has increased by nearly 20% in the last 6 months and is now the highest in Southeast Asia. India imports almost 80% of its crude oil and does not have a regulation to cap the prices for consumers.
It's very expensive beyond the budget. So we are trying to cut down on some things.
Anger and frustration have been simmering for a while. Since February, thousands have been demonstrating against inflation. Transport professionals like Jaswant Singh are bearing the brunt of the rising prices.
The price of fuel is rising, but the customers are not willing to pay more.
Jaswant owns 55 taxis, all of which were purchased on credit. Today, he's at the brink of bankruptcy.
So there's no profit margin?
No, there's absolutely no profit margin anymore.
If prices continue to rise, we will have to shut down our business.
Jaswant is not alone. Economists fear the price hike could slow down the economy significantly.
And it's affecting production because farmers who use a lot of oil, in the urban areas, transportation is being hit. The airlines are also raising their prices. So everybody is getting hit by this thing. The government is going to have to make a choice because politically it's proving to be costly for them.
According to the ratings agency Moody's, the inflation could slow down this Asian giant's economy by 0.2%.
So that's the situation in India. To get a more global picture, we're joined from London by Richard Mallinson, geopolitical analyst at Energy Aspects. Richard, the trend over the past few months has generally been upwards for oil prices, more or less. What's been driving that?
Well, we've seen a combination of things. We've seen very healthy demand growth. We've seen, obviously, the US decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. A lot of losses of production elsewhere, places like Venezuela and Angola. All of that's come together to really tighten up the market. We don't have a big overhang of oil left anymore, and that's being priced in by global markets and also the anticipation that we're going to lose a lot of Iranian supplies as we get later on this year and into 2019.
And that's the warning too from the International Energy Agency. They're saying a production shortfall because of the lower output coming from Venezuela and less Iranian barrels going onto the market. Is that going to have much of a further impact, do you think?
I think it certainly will. We are in a very different paradigm now to the one that we got used to for several years, where markets were well supplied and so prices were low and so consumers and importing countries benefited. Now we're looking at a situation where the market is actually short of oil. Prices have to go up to both ration demand and also to incentivize more investment to bring more supply online. But that isn't an immediate process. There is some more oil that OPEC can choose to bring online. We've got a key meeting coming up on the 22nd of June, and the market's watching very closely for what the Saudis, what the Russians, and what the rest of OPEC do and decide at that meeting. But beyond that, investment in new production can take months or even years to come online, and that can mean we could have a period of tightness and high prices.
Well, let's talk about OPEC. A lot of those producers will be delighted that oil prices are going up. Do you see the production cap being scrapped?
I don't think they'll move to scrap it immediately. Certainly, the group can be pretty happy with overall how they've managed to deal with the overhang, the excess of oil that had built up, how prices have moved up. It's a lot more comfortable territory, although many of them, particularly the ones that have lost a lot of production in recent years, like Venezuela, need prices to be even higher for their budgets to balance. And so there are still competing factions and positions in terms of what to do next. The Saudis, for instance, don't want prices to rise too quickly. They equally don't want to see prices fall back from the levels they are now. Other countries would still like to see more price gains sooner rather than later to bring more revenue in through the door. And so what I think will happen is we'll have quite a fractious meeting. There may not be much officially announced, but the countries that do have the ability to produce more oil are going to bring a bit more on over the second half of this year and then bring some more in 2019. And that'll help us to avoid a really tight position where we simply don't have enough oil to go around. But we're still going to be in a market that has much less in the way of supply than we got used to over several years.
Do you think this will now renew the push to invest in renewable energy, to look for alternatives to oil?
Certainly, I think that at the consumer level, as you see kind of petrol, gasoline prices going up, it does change the calculation for a lot of buyers when they're looking at the next vehicle to purchase. Similarly, we've seen kind of manufacturers building and changing their fleets to try and bring both more fuel-efficient vehicles and a higher proportion of electric vehicles and alternative fuel vehicles. But it's a very, very slow process. This isn't going to be an overnight transformation. In the power sector, yes, renewables are making more inroads, but that's not really competition with oil. That's with gas, with coal, with nuclear. And where we're looking at transportation fuels, where we're looking at petrochemicals, the two big drivers of oil demand, it's going to take us a long time to move meaningful amounts of that demand away from oil onto alternatives. And so I think even with higher prices, right the way through the next decade, we're going to see global oil demand growing year on year.
OK, Richard Mallinson from Energy Aspects in London, thank you very much for joining us. Next, the world's most watched sporting event is getting underway in Russia. The World Cup sees 32 football teams play 64 matches in 11 cities across the country. The beautiful game is about far more than just sport, though. Despite facing international sanctions and slow economic growth, organisers say Russia is putting more than $11 billion into the tournament. But is hosting a major sports event always a good investment? Kate Moody's been finding out. Kate.
Well, Stephen, at the risk of sounding like a bad sport, many economists would argue no. The $11 billion that Russia has earmarked doesn't include spending on stadiums or infrastructure. The government claims that has already contributed 1% to the country's GDP. Organisers say 220,000 jobs have been created, although most are temporary. They're predicting an economic boost of nearly $31 billion over the next decade. To put it in perspective, Brazil spent up to $15 billion on the last World Cup, the most expensive in history. But the concrete return fell short. 1 million visitors attended the competition, bringing a short-term boost for the hotel, restaurant and retail industries. But that wore off quickly while prices remained higher. Moreover, not everyone felt the benefits. Thousands of poor families in Brazil were forced out of their homes to make way for new venues, while the most expensive stadium is now largely unused. Analysis shows that advanced economies earn more money from hosting such events because they have to put less into upgrading their sporting, transport, and tourist infrastructure. They profit from ticket and merchandise sales, sponsorships, and television rights. But the sport's governing bodies also cash in. 4 years ago, FIFA generated nearly $5 billion in revenue, while the International Olympic Committee takes in more than 70% of TV rights for their games. Of course, what fans really care about is who wins. And economics can play a role in that too. Banks and market analysts around the world have been running simulations to predict who will lift that trophy. It may come as no surprise to football fanatics to hear that Brazil, Germany, Spain and France have been tipped as the hot favourites. Stephen?
Kate, we'll have to come back to you on that and see what the results end up as. Kate Moody, thank you very much. We're turning next to denim jeans, which could be the next victim of the trade tensions between the European Union and the United States. It's just one of the products the EU is threatening to hit with import tariffs after the US imposed a tax on European steel and aluminium. The dispute could see a resurgence in the French jean-making industry, where producers are focusing on higher quality at higher prices. Clement Bonnereau has more.
Nestled in the heart of the Cevennes Mountains in southern France, France's oldest denim maker. Every day, some 25 trousers are cut, sewn and stitched here in keeping with local tradition.
Made in France jeans are nothing new. We've been making jeans for 125 years, but we're delighted that now customers are drawn to our products again. The more interest there is in our jeans, the more orders we get. It's a virtuous cycle.
The family company has come a long way. Production dropped from 500 pairs of jeans a day 100 years ago to just 500 a year at the turn of the century. And from the initial 60 employees, only 3 remained.
No one was interested in taking over the company, so at some point we thought about stopping it all.
Julien Tuffery was reluctant to follow in his father's footsteps at first. But in 2014, he quit his engineering job and took up the reins of the business, sensing a new opportunity. His idea to make high-quality jeans using organic, locally sourced materials, including wool, a way to differentiate himself from his American and Chinese competitors.
We're promoting local resources, and in turn, we're helping the local economy to thrive.
Quality comes at a price between 100 and 300 euros for a pair of jeans. But for customers, the final product is worth it.
We're French, so it makes sense to buy from a French brand.
It makes a change not to buy something from China for once.
To keep costs low, 90% of the jeans produced here are sold on the internet. Today, the company is successful again. Sales have gone up and 10 new members of staff have been hired.
That's it from us for this week. If you want to get in touch with your thoughts on the stories we've been covering, you'll find us on Facebook at France 24 Business, or you can tweet me at NewStephen. Until next time, thanks for watching.